everyone, and thank you for joining us. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Sheridan. He is a principal ecologist for Stanford Consulting Inc., as well as an affiliate faculty member at the University of South Florida. 20-year career includes research across Florida in topics ranging from algae blooms to saltwater intrusion to managing a 7,000-acre mitigation bank. Dr. Yu also strongly supports mentorship and actively trains students in the environmental sciences field. The presentation is titled Putting Science to Work, Bridging Academia and Industry. Take it away, Dr. Yu.
And I found some swag that we had in my office, so pencils, if anybody needs pencils. All right, so well, thank you for coming today, and it's a pleasure and privilege to share with you some of the work that I've been doing and sort of what makes me tick. So, who am I? I guess just a little bit of background. I consider myself a curious biologist, curious scientist. We talked about it at lunch. For those of you, we did lunch together. A wife, a mother, a principal, consultant, a teacher. As a kid, I always knew that I wanted to be a biologist. My earliest memory as a kid was trying to dig out some snakes from a hole I had found. We lived at the edge of the forest in Malaysia. And I was trying to dig out some of these snakes to get them to come play with me, which when my parents found out they were vipers, they were not very happy. But I guess that sort of stuck in my mind enough that I was like, oh, let me grow up and do more than just play with snakes. So I also have believed in teaching. My parents were both teachers, and I've always enjoyed teaching and sharing the knowledge that I have. I don't believe it's good to have it all rattling in my head. It gets too messy that way, so I share it, and then I don't have to remember it. And last, I feel like I'm an eternal optimist. My husband says that, could be hung upside down and I'd still be smiling, but if you don't have that, what else do we have, right? So I feel very fortunate and lucky to be here in front of all of you because, and this is a picture of a lucky cat, Eastern lucky cat, because I came from Malaysia, halfway around the world, to come to undergraduate at Clark University. I got a scholarship to come, and I was fortunate enough to be able to hey, Mike. Yeah, and it was the whole culture change, whole different environment altogether. But I enjoyed it. It was a very different environment. I had the freedom, I had the ability to go explore, and I basically volunteered for everything and anything. I did a summer at Woods Hole. I did an internship at Shell, with a university in Malaysia, doing some work for Shell, looking at benthic organisms. And I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica for one semester, which I did not take them up on, because otherwise I'd be on a different trajectory now. I did a stint also between undergraduate and graduate school at a consulting firm, and that was kind of interesting because it was a small firm, and they said, we need somebody to be a biologist, and we need somebody to start a chemistry lab. And I said, I'll do both. So for the price of two, they got me. I built them a chemistry lab, and I did their water quality sampling for 5 or 6 months before I started grad school. I also had the opportunity to go to all these other places, Costa Rica, to Borneo, to go into back to Malaysia to do graduate work for Yale, but I chose not to. And then in graduate school, I was just there was a graduate student who needed some help in Palau, and I almost went there because I thought, man, how cool would it be to go to Palau and go check that out? Ended up not going, which is good. I ended up sticking around, finishing my PhD at UM, and then opted to do a postdoc at the Smithsonian instead of UC Davis. So after a couple of years at the Smithsonian, I went and came down here to FIU actually for about 3.5 years. I had the opportunity to go to the University of North Carolina at that time at Asheville to be a faculty member. And I thought, man, that would be cool. I could go whitewater rafting. I could go hiking after school, after work. But then that would be it, right? There would be no research, there would be no support structure for research. And FIU was offering way less money, but the possibility of
We do.
the time, but the possibility of research. And I said, what the heck? My husband, my boyfriend at that time, he was a graduate student, he was supportive of it, so we came down here. So I stuck around at FIU for a while, and then I ended up going into private consulting thereafter. The reason I share this with you all is life is a journey. I'm standing in front of you as a product of many years of experience and happenstance and circumstance, right? If I'd taken one of those paths, we would all be doing we could all be doing something else different. Yet we are here today in this room together. And you'll see this as a recurring theme throughout my talk. Standing up and saying yes. As an undergraduate, I volunteered in a nuclear physics lab doing radioactive isotope counting. It was pretty boring. I realized quickly after one semester, I didn't want to do it anymore. I did organic chemistry. I volunteered in that lab. Quickly learned I wasn't cut out to be an organic chemist because the product I started with would make people cry. And you had to go through a sequence of steps. And the final product, if it was pure, would be the potential for a precursor for a antidepressant. I evacuated the lab more times that semester than they cared to think about. And basically at the end of the semester, it was decided it was probably best I didn't come back to keep evacuating the lab and disrupting all the other students. So I also did some benthic invertebrate work in Malaysia for Shell, like I said, and I realized that after 5 hours of looking in a microscope every day, I was done. I did not want to have anything to do with microscopes ever again. I tried to finish my work as quick as I could and get out. But I did go back and do some benthic invert work in Bermuda, just because I had the ability to try it out and do the project on my own time. So that worked out well. I still like benthic inverts till today. And then I did some ecophysiological work at the New England Botanical Garden, which turned into a publication because I was helping the graduate student, and we both ended up being co-authors on that paper. And so in grad school, I decided I wanted to go back to Malaysia and do work and teach, be a professor. This was between undergrad and grad school. And so I thought I'll do work on mangrove ecology. I grew up with mangroves, that'd be kind of cool. And then I got sidetracked because looking at Brazilian pepper was way cooler. It was an interesting plant. It occurred not only in the lowlands, it also occurred in the uplands here in Florida. And it was becoming a problem at that time, 15, 20 years ago. So that's what I did. After that, I went into the Smithsonian, like I said earlier, to do mangrove ecophysiology. And I also did work with UF. I happened to run into a professor at UF and he's like, hey, I need somebody to do physiological work. And I said, all right, I'll come around. I'll bring my equipment around. I'll help you. So we got a couple of papers out of that, which was kind of cool. And then I came down here to work with the LTR for a couple of years. So what made me switch? I was fully on track to get into faculty work, like university teaching and being a faculty. But what made me decide to switch was one day I was sitting there at an ESA conference. This was many, many moons ago, sitting there watching all these people. I just presented my work, gotten patted on the back by everybody, you know, the 50 people in the room who do the same sort of work. It's like, good job, you know. And I sat there and I was watching people leave the room and come the next talk start. And it made me think, you know, it's great. All these 50 people think my work is great, but it's going to get published. It's going to go into a journal. And then that's it. Some random person years down the road may pull it and have a look at it. But for the most part, it's going to stay bound up in the library. And I felt like I wanted to have more meaning and impact to my day-to-day work. So I wanted to get out there and do something that made a difference to people's lives. And that in itself has its inherent rewards and risks. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that. So what is environmental consulting? Well, it's basically solving real life problems that people have. And many of these issues have tangible consequences. Right, wastewater sewage spill that has consequences to the environment, it has consequences to people's lives, and it has consequences to the organisms that inhabit that space. So I put up a little star here to remind myself to say that this is not only an environmental consulting, this is a general note for life, just little stars that I put down there last night. I thought was quite clever at 11:30 last night. So these are just notes for life, you know. A lot of us, we go through life solving problems, one type or another, personnel problems, staffing problems, academic problems, class problems. So but just having the ability to solve problems is a good skill set to have. Being able to think on your feet and react quickly is a good skill. So what did I do with my first years at E&E? That was the firm that I joined. Well, first, let me say, they did not have a job. They had advertised for a job. I had applied to the position and they said, oh, we just filled it, but we like the look of your resume. So just come on over and talk to us. I went up to West Palm Beach, spilled coffee on my shirt. So I had to keep my jacket buttoned up the whole time because I had a huge old coffee stain on me. And sat in the hot Cuban restaurant, didn't unbutton it. Anyhow, they didn't have a job. So I didn't think much about it. And then the manager of the office, the boss, called me back and he's like, well, we like your resume, we have no job. I'll try and see what I can do. No promises. 3 months later, he called me up. He's like, this is what I've been able to do. Can you start? And the reason they wanted me is because they were looking for a very specific skill set at that time. So in life, it's helpful to be lucky. They were looking for somebody who could work on invasive species and had some physiological experience in the tree islands because they were trying to figure out what was going on with the tree islands at the water management district. And the islands they felt were being drowned. So that was one aspect of physiology. They needed somebody who had the tools and the ability to understand. And the second was just the invasive exotic Lygodium, the old world climbing fern. They were having issues with that. And they wanted help in trying to understand how widespread it was, how pervasive, and could we go scout 60 islands? Nobody, I guess, there's a shortage of people wanting to go walk the tree islands, I guess. But I said, okay, I'll do it. So I got a team together, and that's Jennifer up right, on the top right there, and Damien. And we walked the islands. We also did at the same time physiological experiments as a gas exchange chamber over there on the top left. And Jennifer at 6 in the morning doing pre-dawn water potentials because we were trying to figure out what the water potentials of these trees were in the middle of the night. So we would start at 1 in the morning, go till 6 or 7 in the morning, and then collect some water samples and then go home. So at like 8 in the morning, we were pretty loopy. This is us sitting on the platform there. Our airboat driver drove by and he's like, you guys look like you're high. I'm like, yeah, because we haven't slept for like a day and a half. But it was a lot of fun. We did that for about a year and a half, and wrote up a bunch of reports for the district. And this Lygodium work that we've been doing for them, they've liked it enough that now we've been doing it for the last 15 years for them. So every year they say we have this little project we'd like to follow is morph from just walking islands to help us figure out what's going on here and what do you think the next steps should be. So we have been helping them on that. We also did a short bit for them on Ghost Tree Islands. And these are Ghost Tree Islands in conservation area 2, and they're called Ghost Tree Islands because some of these islands have basically disappeared, and it just appears, the silhouette of the island just appears to be a scar in the landscape. So they wanted to figure out, what was going on with the nutrient dynamics below ground. We collected about 180 soil cores, sectioned them all into 1 centimeter pieces, and send them off for nutrient analysis so we could look at vertical gradient of nitrogen and phosphorus on the islands in the head, the mid, and the near tail. And so we did that, and we actually got a paper out of it for one of the islands, and that was written up by the district. So in consulting, you can still have the ability to publish, even though, and of course, write general book chapters or support in book chapters for folks. But a lot of the work is for regulatory compliance. So unfortunately, some of it, or majority of it, people want to stay out of the public realm of getting it out there because there could be unexpected consequences. The work that I've been doing for the last decade and change mainly is on Biscayne Bay. That's the bulk of my time doing an environmental monitoring in the marsh, mangrove, and in the Biscayne Bay proper itself. And we're doing that in the model lens. We have a data set now that's about 13 years looking at the mangrove productivity as well as the marsh productivity. And these are the folks that I have who've been working with me. Majority of them came from FIU, so thank you all. Yeah, they're good. They are good, they're fast, there's a lot of work to be done, and they're very efficient with it. So we monitor the plants, we do the water, groundwater and surface water, as well as we do the animals. I don't partake in so much of that day-to-day work anymore because it's for the hardy and the days run really long and we run for 2 weeks, sometimes 3, depending on weather, 12 to 14-hour days. So I just go out and dabble now, and I go do and deal with problems like the harmful algal bloom issues that we have, where we collect data every 2 weeks, staff collect data, and I go and I do monitoring of specific aspects of the ecosystem. So I do soil cores. We look for algae on the surface of these cores. We try to address, we had an issue with some amphipods that were causing some trouble, some larvae and worms that were in the system. So I go in and I try to help with the broader, bigger issues now. We also have staff who do in-water work, plankton, toes, and all. And oops, once again, I just wander in there and say, hey, what do you have in your nets? And yeah, it's pretty interesting, but the days are long. Another project that I recently inherited because a colleague of mine left the firm is a project that is monitoring the mitigation bank for the Fort Myers International Airport. When the airport expanded, they had to create a mitigation bank near the headwaters of the Corkscrew Swamp. And what they ended up doing is just having this area lie fallow for a while. But it turns out that in some of these areas, you actively have to manage it. You have a mitigation bank, you can't let it be, you have to actively manage it. So we have the area, the whole 7,000 acres now on a treatment cycle and then on a burn cycle. And it turns out, because there's so much development now, keeping nature wild actually is basically active management. And this spring we'll have staff go through the whole 7,000 acres to basically walk it and check and make sure that the vegetation there is what needs to be there and not patches of invasive exotics. So it's an ongoing process, and it's an interesting one, but it's an ongoing one. So consulting work is not just field work. A lot of it is actually in-house, putting paperwork together, putting it for reports, putting QA/QC plans together, and getting it to the agencies, because somebody's paying you money to do that work. They want to see what the outcome is. And for the broader efforts, like if somebody's trying to put a transmission line through a national forest, I was involved in a project like that some years ago. You need to develop an environmental impact assessment and look at alternatives. And that document is about a year in production usually, and it takes about a dozen people working on it because you have to develop alternatives. The federal government, which is what EIS and EAs are generally issued related to, they don't want to see a 15-page document that says, oh, well, this is what we decided on. They want you to do an exhaustive survey that says, hey, you know, we looked at this option that doesn't work. We look at this option that doesn't work. And so you have to go through about 7 or 8 different options and provide them the full suite and be transparent in what you do. And so you end up having to spend a lot of time with a lot of folks from different technical backgrounds, geologists, engineers, hydrologists, modelers, to say, well, at the end of the day, after you spend your $300,000 developing this report, this is what you need to do to move forward with the project. And at the time that gets turned in, it could go to court, people could sue and say, oh, we don't like it. A lot of homeowners say, oh yeah, not in my backyard. No way in hell I'm gonna allow that. And so then you have to figure out and divert and reroute things. So it's a problem, you're trying to help solve a problem. And hopefully at the end of the day, there is minimal environmental impact and everybody gets what they need. As a transmission line went through the National Forest, this was up around the Tallahassee area, they needed power. We all like air conditioning, we all like heat, right? So, you know, we all have to figure out how to make it work and get along. So like I said, majority of the work is done to meet regulatory compliance and or restoration needs. So the agency, the companies or the agencies or the entities who want to have an action done, like develop the transmission line or to build a new water treatment plant or whatever it is that they're doing. They have to make sure that the work is done to a certain standard and that there aren't any negative issues. The city I live in, St. Petersburg, we've had issues with wastewater for a long time. Because when it rains, rainwater gets into the sewage line and then it causes overflow of the sewage lines and it spills. And so the city has a lot of very expensive consultants on there. And people are like, well, why are you paying $600,000 for somebody to help you address your wastewater treatment issue? The problem is if you don't, you don't have the proper documentation from somebody who's done the engineering studies, the modeling studies, the water quality studies, you could get fined. You could get fined thousands of dollars a day. And so the agencies are responsible to the public, and so they have to make you toe the line. So it's all business. There's nothing personal in here. And so because of that, they will issue you different violation orders, consent agreements, consent orders, notice of violations, administrative orders, or if you're nice and you sit down with them in advance of it, they'll give you a permit. That way it's less threatening than a notice of violation. People get really upset when they receive a notice of violation because that generally means that the agencies are going to be implementing some sort of enforcement action shortly. So ideally, what you like to do is when you start seeing issues, a lot of the times we get called in. If they're savvy folks, I do work for FPL, you know, they'll call us in and they say, we have this issue, what can we do? Let's head it off before it gets to a notice of violation level or we get fined or it gets out in the news. So you try to, a lot of times we get the phone calls because people want to head off the issues, or they've had issues that have already caused problems that are going to hit the news. So the East Palestine Railway, you guys remember that up in Ohio? Well, we got called on a Friday, the week after it occurred. And that was because the company that had been brought on board to do the groundwater sampling after the train derailed and they started burning all these chemicals, which then turned into toxic substances that went into the groundwater. The company that came in to do the work had not sampled the bottles, the water samples correctly. They were sampling for volatile organics. And when you have samples for volatiles, your sample has to be sealed. You create an air bubble at the top of your bottle, and then you cap it real quick so that there is no air bubble. Because otherwise, your volatiles will go into that little bubble. And so what had happened is, and this is all public information, you can go, I found it on Huffington Post, which had a link to the Ohio Department of Environment that had the lab report, that the lab report said there was an air bubble. We logged it and we noticed that there was an air bubble in that bottle when we were testing it for volatile organics. And that was going to hit the news the next day. We got the call Friday afternoon and the company said, can you send a team out like ASAP? I sent an email to, we got a call, I got the email on Saturday. I texted my chemist at 2 p.m. on Saturday. I said, can you get on a plane Monday morning to get out there? They need people now. And he said, yes. So 5 o'clock, they made plans and they were able to get enough people so that we took over and we've been doing the sampling for that effort ever since. But, you know, they were trying to head it off. They knew they were gonna get into lawsuits. So a lot of this work that you do in consulting has consequences and it has to be done, and it has to be done to the highest degree of, to the highest standard. So, yeah, so any questions or anything? Gee,
From your side, what's the difference between an environmental impact statement and an environmental impact assessment?
the EIA is less intense and rigorous than the EIS. So the EIS is a much bigger document that may involve you looking at the impacts surrounding, maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 miles surrounding that whole area and looking at a broader scale impact. So they're just different levels of the same type of documentation,
Thanks.
documenting impacts. All right. Yes.
What were your findings from the Ohio train derailment? To what extent have the groundwater sort of retain the chemicals and compounds that were being exposed from the train? Like, what were your findings from the train derailment?
So I don't know the full extent of it, and I think it's all still going to court, but my just reading of it from the news is that there were samples that were collected from the ground that were done during the winter time, right? Because the public was all up in arms about it, you know, you put this in our ground. It went into this river. The superficial water was contaminated. I have no doubt that the groundwater around the river was probably contaminated also. But the sampling that was done, that was gonna hit the news, was for us, that was for places that were farther away. So it was within the community itself. And at first, when we were out there, there was nothing there. Which is why it hasn't really made the news. I don't think there was much contamination the further away you went, because one, it was winter time, it was like February, March, the ground was still frozen. And then we were sampling a little bit farther. The team that was close to the river, I know there was fish kill and there were all these samples. And the way they remediated was they basically scraped all the dirt out. Anything they felt had contamination. As folks were telling me, they were hauling out like trailer loads of dirt. Who knows what they were doing with it, but they were just basically excavating all the contamination site to get rid of the material, which is the way they normally do it. And then I think they'll put it in a lined landfill. Where that ended up for that project, I don't know. Oh. Sorry.
I need to take more photos.
Oh.
I need your code. Sorry.
So, all right. So going beyond academia, right? What skills does one need to have to be able to get a job with not just Stantec, but any consulting firm? Well, one I can tell you is we're always looking for good people. People who, one, can handle themselves in the field, people who can write well, people who can do work, both, at least for me, this is my perspective, who have some experience of how the world works, either through internship experience or through taking field classes or classes that offer you more than just book learning. That I find is very helpful. Having some level of regulatory understanding is very helpful, because knowing that there are things that you can do that can cause violations, just having an understanding of here's the documentation that DEP has online. To me, that's a win for somebody coming out of school. Having knowledge of plants, being able to ID plants. I've asked a couple of you already, are you guys good at IDing plants? Because we're looking to hire in Fort Myers right now. We need somebody to help with ID plans and do wetland delineations. Having some knowledge of soils would be helpful too, the different types of soils, wetland soils, upland terrestrial soils would be helpful. But for a lot of the work that we do here in the South Florida area, just having these sorts of basic skills and groundwater or surface water sampling per DEP standards is very helpful. If you don't have that, even knowing how to, get a YSI, get it to turn on and have it measure something at a particular depth is helpful. Having to run a peristaltic pump to pull samples from the groundwater or surface water is helpful. So these are the skills that for an entry-level person going in, we find the most practical and most helpful. And those are when I'm looking, that's what we screen by. We ask what experience you have and what it is that you know how to do. So in terms of internships, because I tried a whole lot of internships and volunteer positions when I started. And the reason I stress an internship is because it helps. Knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you like to do, right? So I go back and forth. Sometimes we hire people straight out of school. I prefer to do the internship model because somebody could come and 3 weeks later, they're like, see you later. This is not what I want to do. Last year, we hired a girl and she never even started. I think we told her that she was going to be out in the field and up to the knee. You get off the airboat, you jump off into the water and off you go. And she was a hire from one of somebody had recommended, but it was not my choice to hire her. She got past the training in-house, but she never got out in the field. And yeah, it's just not everybody's cup of tea doing Everglades work or doing field work. So you have to find your passion, whatever that is. Sometimes it takes you 4 or 5 goes, but the main thing is if you can get yourself situated with classes and learning what to do and how to handle some simple things, equipment, learning how to solder, learning how to engineer a circuit or do some wiring, all these hands-on skills, at least for a field biologist, I find extremely helpful. And you can try to get an internship. I've been told several times now that internships are hard to come by. And it is because we don't do it lightly because it's a commitment on my time and my staff's time to bring people on board and then train them. Just like at the university, for you guys to train people, it's a pain for me to train people too. When you have people calling you up and say, where's my report? I need this like right now. And so yeah, if you are interested in something, don't let that deter you, keep trying. Where somebody can say is no, and go ask somebody else, right? You'll eventually figure out what it is that works and what doesn't work. And it's okay sometimes to try and to fail. So I know that people feel really bad. Oh man, I tried this, I really didn't like it. It's all right. Just move on, pick yourself up and just move on. That's what life is all about. Eventually you'll find something that you're passionate about. The other thing I go back to periodically and I struggle with a little bit is regulatory knowledge. And I talked to my boss last night, I was getting on a plane and he's like, you got to put that in there because that's important. And it also helps distinguish somebody we're interviewing from the rest of the pool of candidates. Right? If you can say, I understand the DEP rules and regulations, I understand that Miami-Dade County has a limit for certain chemicals being in the water, that just in itself may distinguish you from other candidates. But then if they ask you what has a limit, you better be able to say, I know that ammonia has a 0.5 milligram per liter limit. Because if you say you know something and you can't produce it, that may not work out quite well. So, just learn up and read up on it. All these documents are publicly available and I'm not the most fluent in them, but I have a working passable knowledge and worst case, I know where to go look for them. Wetland delineation, plants and soils. So we have had a lot of issues with people trying to go out in the field and not having the ability to ID certain, like just simple plants, common plants. And that just slows down the work. So now when we go take people out, we try to make sure that people have a passable knowledge of plants. And the intern that we're applying for, the intern position right now in Fort Myers, which will probably turn into a full-time position if that person works out, I'm asking for a botany class. Because we brought on a person and it turns out he likes bats more. I'm like, great, after a year, you tell me, which wasn't his fault, he didn't really know, but we brought him on board to do wetland delineation. And then he got sidetracked because somebody needed help on bats. And so he's been traveling the country doing bat surveys, which is cool. I would love to do a bat survey. Yeah, so hydrology, that's another thing. Just having a simple basic hydrology class, I think would be helpful in understanding what it is that, and how South Florida environments work. If you're looking for jobs here, just understanding simple hydrological principles, I think in general helps. Because you may go up to Pennsylvania and they'll ask you about the rivers there, and it'd be helpful to advance your career if you knew already a little something about plants, soils, and hydrology. And then the last one, which is a bit of a stretch, is we sample per DEP protocols. DEP has pages and pages of regulations that tell you what it is that you need to do. You need to have gloves. When you do these filters, you need to have the filters a certain way. And when you're sampling, your sample bottles, cannot touch the ground. Stephen was sitting there because it was like 3 hours into it. You can only pump the water at a certain rate. You cannot purge your wells. The tendency is like, yeah, I have a 60-foot well. I'm going to purge the well like quick as I can, collect my sample and leave. But in these karstic environments, if you pull the water too quickly, you can pull water from a different layer and you can affect your sample quality. So you're only supposed to pull at 0.5 gallons a minute. We have 3 wells to pull. So, and you have to purge 3 well volumes. So you're sitting there, and I let them all sit. They have a chair and they have a little canopy and they can sit there as long as the sample bottles don't touch the ground. That's all that the DEP looks for. And the tubing is kept clean. That's what we look for. So having some knowledge of that is very helpful. For a higher degree, what I would expect somebody coming in with a master's or a PhD, if they're going to do regulatory compliance, they need to know and understand the regulatory knowledge and the applications of that knowledge. So if I'm telling you that 0.5 milligram of ammonia is a violation and you have 0.8 milligrams in your water, what do? Somebody needs to be able to know that, yeah, when you have an exceedance, you go back and you look at the data. If it's real, you report it to the agencies, you let them know, and then you start sitting down and talking to them and saying, this is a one-time deal, it doesn't make a trend. The scientist, I'm a strong advocate now of having been in this field. One data point does not make a trend, right? It could be an outlier, but at the same time, if you get one data point, it needs to be flagged. You cannot walk away from it and say, oh, well, it's within the error band of 0.5 or whatever. No, you need to know what to do if you have a violation. It cannot lie because you're being paid to help monitor effluents or loading or contamination, and you need to know if this happens, and that needs to follow, that action has to follow by you doing XYZ. Advanced statistics is helpful. I've used multivariate statistics consistently throughout my time in consulting. We do have some modelers. I'm passable. I do simple models, just simple groundwater 2, 3 N member models. Mike would laugh at me. And then GIS, having the ability to know your way around ArcGIS and present your data cleanly and neatly in a GIS format is useful. A lot of clients now are asking for GIS data. because there's such large volumes of data now. So for that 7,000 acre property for the airport, we had about, I don't know, 300 discrete data points with photos attached to them, GIS, geo-reference points. And there's no way I can put it all in a report. They just said, just email that all to us. And so that's what one of our staff did. He knew his way around our GIS. I don't. And then doing some simple hands-on electronics is helpful. Don't burn out the circuit in the field. Just know what, yeah, simple stuff is good. Fixing, so you can fix stuff in the field as well. Some basic coding that's been useful in some instances, especially when you can code and try to do some simple models with that. And yeah, the other thing is just other, sort of specialty programs. I use a Piper diagram program to create trilinear diagrams or Piper diagrams where you take a whole lot of data and you try to collapse it into a two-dimensional triangular space to look at where the water is coming from or what type of water you have. So salt water generally ends up on one end of the trilinear diagram, fresh water is on another end. I'm trying to figure out where my water falls within that line. And if you have 10 parameters, calcium, magnesium, all these ions, cations and anions, it's sometimes hard to try to look at one parameter and get a real picture. So we collapse it all to be able to look at it holistically. And so doing other things that distinguish you, that have merit in field data and ecological data is helpful. Communications, and this is just a life skill, right? Having good communication skills, being able to listen. I work in a room where sometimes a lot of people like to talk a lot. I've sat in a room with 30 agency people and everybody's talking over each other. Nobody has a bit of data, but they're like, oh, I think I know what's going on here, and this is what's going on. And so everybody has their own opinion, but sometimes it's important to stop and sit and listen so that you can understand what's going on. And at that meeting with about 30 people, I was like this little person in the back of the room. I said, we have no data for any of this. And it took 9 months for us meeting monthly before somebody finally said, we should really go out there and collect some data. And we did. And then they're like, oh crap, we need a lot more data. And so that's turned into what I'm doing now for FPNL. And, being there at the meeting one was helpful. Being able to offer my 2 cents, even though it took a while to register, was helpful. And then, just being there, seeing the process and having the opportunity to then bid on the work. When they put the RFP out, we were able to say, here's what we think you should do. And this is because we've sat in on these meetings. So that was very helpful. The other part that I've come to realize more and more is nonverbal communication, which a lot of the times if you're meeting with agency folks and lawyers, it's helpful to look at body posture. 70% of all communication is nonverbal. So you can listen to them talk, you can see how they handle themselves, and it probably means they could be on board or they could not be on board, or they're gonna go shoot you out there when you walk out the room because they're so mad at you. But yeah, I've had lawyers who've told me that they're the client, they know what's right, and that's what they want to do. And I'm like, that's fine, you can say that, but I'm not gonna listen to you because that is not the right thing to do. And sometimes they hear you, sometimes they don't hear you because they are on their own track. And then you just have to let it be and then have to negotiate with somebody else. Because we've had to deal with some people, you get paid a lot of money to sell a certain line or to pull a certain line. And you'll run into those people throughout your life. Right? You can't fight everybody. You have to choose your battles and you have to choose what it is that you can meaningfully make a difference with. So, yeah. Having the confidence of saying stuff, sometimes I still struggle with that because there are people who have a lot more experience than you. It's a little bit intimidating to stand up, but if you think it's the right thing to do, you just have to do it. So I'm talking about consulting, but this also applies to the public sector work, right? Public sector work, working for Miami-Dade County or working for DEP, working for the city. Everybody needs good people. Everybody needs people who can problem solve, who can think on one's feet. Because a lot of times, if you don't solve the problems when they're small, or you ignore them when, even worse, ignore them when they're small problems, they could turn into bigger issues. So I take a very proactive approach. I'm always on the lookout to make sure that, you know, if we can solve an issue today, don't wait till tomorrow. Because there could be more impacts than you know what to do with and how to handle. So if you can handle it now, deal with it now. Yeah, everybody's always looking for good people, especially now. The labor market is tight. And everybody has issues that they need solved. So we actually just hired 2 people this year, both came from FIU. So we're gonna try to be good, and hopefully we have good people to work with. I'm a strong proponent of, you know, surrounding yourself with good people and working with good people. My example that I share with my staff is President Obama did not become president because he was by himself. He wasn't in a vacuum. He was a smart guy. He was a lawyer, a community organizer. But going from community organizer, he could have stayed a community organizer his whole life. But he had people who believed in him, who supported him, and who got him to where he was. So on a smaller scale, not that I'm advocating running for president these days, but
Need smart people.
what I'm saying is, you know, whoever you surround yourself with good people, people who will watch your back, people who will advocate for you, and you will grow. You'll be successful. Always be curious and make your own opportunities and possibilities. We sit here today, you know, your path could go one way or the other. You should try things. There'll be things that'll be dead ends, but there'll be others, and the one that you go down, that may be the path that brings you satisfaction. Right? I always wanted to save the world in my own little small way, so I'm trying to do it. And success comes in many shapes and forms, right? Sometimes it's field work. Sometimes it's going out and getting dirty in the mangroves with a bunch of folks. And otherwise it's torturing the family and making them dress up for Chinese New Year. And success is hard. You have to be persistent. You will fail, no doubt about it, you will fail. You will have to sacrifice to be successful. You will be disappointed. We probably had about, I don't know, 30, 40 applicants for our intern position. We hired 1. I was thinking about it last night. There are 39 people who are getting so sorry letters. So you will face disappointment, but if you're dedicated, you work hard, you persist, and you have good habits, which is, I guess, important to my staff. 6:45 in the morning, when they're ready to leave, they need everybody to be ready and jump in the truck. So having good habits like that is important. And then you'll do well. So in closing, I have questions for you all, and what you want to do and what makes you happy. Where do you want to be? And you have to just start working towards that from now, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Start working towards it. And yeah, surround yourself with good people. Thank you.